part of the RLEG initiative by the Basque government. I'm Fabian Zürlich, the Chief Executive of the European Policy Center, an independent Brussels-based think tank, and it's my pleasure to moderate today's event. What we're looking into is the potential role of EU regions with legislative power in the EU, looking at the policy context, including with regard to the Conference on the Future of Europe, covering questions of legitimacy, effectiveness and capacity, and desire and barriers to EU policy influencing and delivery by these regions. The EPC has been working on a report on this topic, which was supported by the Basque government, which will be presented by the EPC senior advisor, Alison Hunter, a little bit later on. I will be introducing the speakers as we go along, and after the initial interventions, there will also be an opportunity to pick up any questions from the audience. If you do have any comments or questions, preferably in English, then please put them under the live chat or top chat heading on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have a question or a comment which is addressed at a particular person, please specify which person you would like to address. And we will then collate those questions and comments by the team, and I will hopefully be able to get to them later on in the event. After the initial interventions and the question and answer session, there will also be a part of the event where we will hear from a number of regions. I will introduce these later on, and I already want to apologize for my pronunciation of some of the names. It's a wide range of different languages which we will have to deal with. So starting with the initial interventions, I want to first go to the Basque government. And on behalf of the RLEG initiative, we first have Lehendakari Inigo Okuya. The floor is yours. Looking forward to hear your intervention.
Presidente Ordea, Agintariok, Jaun Andreok.
Dear Presidents, Vice Presidents, authorities, ladies and gentlemen, it is both a pleasure and an honor to share with this distinguished panel the ideas of the RLEG initiative and those of the government of which I am president regarding the future of the European Union. In particular, the ideas and proposals on the role that nations and regions with legislative powers should play in the process of European construction. The RLEG initiative was launched in 2018 by a group of regions with a proven European vocation and commitment to integration. At the time, 6 governments launched this initiative on the basis of a key observation, namely the existence in the European Union of composite states and non-state governments with far-reaching political and legislative powers. This was the sense of the contribution made to the subsidiarity, proportionality, and better regulation task force chaired by European Commission Vice President Frans Timmermans. We, the RLEG members and proponent governments, propose to the EU institutions, firstly, to open a structured and systematic dialogue with regions and nations with legislative powers to inspire a new model of governance that will enable us to participate directly in decision-making within the European Union. Our approach is inspired by the contribution made at the 2002-2003 European Convention by the then member of the European Parliament, Mr. Alain Lamassoure, who I should like to greet quite especially. We proposed that a working group be set up to analyze the creation of the status of a region associated to the Union. In May 2021, with the presentation of the Conference on the Future of Europe, we took another step forward. On this occasion, the following 16 governments of European nations or regions, the Ireland Islands, Azores, Balearic Islands, the Basque Country, Carinthia, Catalonia, Corsica, Flanders, Madeira, Piedmont, Salzburg, the Tyrol, Valencia, and Vorarlberg, signed and submitted the RLEG Charter to the presidency of the conference. We firstly asked to participate and offer our viewpoint at the conference plenary, with the aim of contributing our knowledge and our experience in the management of key public policies for the future of Europe. Secondly, we called for the organization of a high-level debate that would allow progress to be made on two goals: an effective model of multi-level governance and appropriate integration of regions with legislative powers into the institutional architecture of the European Union. We reiterate the need for an open and honest reflection on this matter in the framework of the Conference on the Future of Europe. We, the governments who signed the RLEG letter, are key agents of political transformation. We have extensive powers and we enjoy the trust of millions of citizens of the Union. We share a commitment to the same challenges facing the European Union, namely reducing inequality, maintaining the welfare state, responding to migratory movements, and successfully tackling the green, demographic, and digital transitions. For there to be a post-COVID recovery and the transformation of the socio-economic model, the hard work and collaboration of all levels of government are necessary, each in their respective area of power. It is essential that responses are shaped through effective multi-level governance, thus guaranteeing the participation of citizens and allowing the different needs and realities of the territories and peoples of the European Union to be taken into account. In short, it is a question of democratic legitimization, a key issue for the future of Europe in an area of close interdependence and shared sovereignty, such as the European Union. We propose beginning a new phase. Over the last decade, the place of sub-state entities in the EU's architecture has barely been visible on the European agenda. It is true that all levels of government are called upon to contribute and to work together in defining the future of our Union. However, the Union has traditionally been characterized by what has come to be known as regional blindness. Unfortunately, the trend towards policy centralization has only increased in recent months, with policies tending to adopt a one-size-fits-all approach for all territories. This approach just perpetuates the habit of disregarding diversity. The limited success of our demands should make us reflect upon how to move forward with greater pragmatism, putting forward more concrete and constructive proposals. We are jointly responsible for European integration, and we must be proactive and assertive. We have the experience, the capacity, and the legitimacy to reshape the social contract between European citizens and to strengthen the consensus necessary to deepen the process of integration. This being the case, we, in the Basque government, defend the need to move towards an institutional model that guarantees that regions be firmly anchored within the decision-making process of the European Union. This proposal is expressed today with the signing of the political declaration of the RLEG Initiative. This declaration will be sent to the presidency of the Conference on the Future of Europe. In it, we proclaim that the governments of the regions with legislative powers have political, financial, and technical expertise in the development of public policies that are often related to key aspects of the Union's agenda. broadening our participation in the EU policy cycle would allow us to develop European policies based on better data, evidence, and knowledge of the reality on the ground. It would also make it easier to include a more targeted approach, more adapted to different regional realities when designing and implementing EU policies. We are talking about strengthening the bottom-up approach, favoring the territorial dimension of EU initiatives. EU institutions have opted to approach the Conference on the Future of Europe as a broad participatory process that gives citizens a voice. But quite clearly, many citizens in regions with legislative powers feel closely connected to the regional governments and parliaments that represent them. It is therefore crucial for the EU's democratic legitimacy and responsiveness to fully engage these actors in the political process. The RLEG initiative can and should play a key role in determining the direction of progress in the integration process. We reiterate our readiness to contribute to the future of the Union and to work together with member states and European institutions to define and implement policies and processes that can respond to the complex challenges we face. More specifically, we put forward the following proposals to be presented at the Council on the Future of Europe. Firstly, the creation of an interinstitutional forum in which regions with legislative powers as EU partner regions can regularly share advice and expertise with the EU institutions in the following areas: strategic monitoring of the design and development of the EU legislative and political process. Particular attention could be paid to monitoring how this fit for purpose the EU's multi-level governance system is in relation to its capacity to fully involve regions with legislative powers and to propose improvements. Identify specific policies where RLEG can provide evidence of knowledge and capacity in order to collaborate and optimize their formulation and implementation. This could include, for example, the debate on the European semester, territorial impact assessment, EU foresight, and better regulation. Explore the possibility for regions with legislative powers to participate in enhanced cooperation on matters affecting them. This proposal is in line with a resolution on the implementation of the treaty provisions on enhanced cooperation adopted by the European Parliament on the 13th of February 2019. And to conclude, as stated in our declaration, I call on you to continue to meet regularly and to explore the relevance of new strategic alignments to advance effective multi-level governance in the EU institutional framework. I also urge you to strengthen the networks of collaboration with individuals and think tanks, such as those who are with us today, in order to continue to deepen our reflections and proposals. We call on the Conference on the Future of Europe to set their sights high when facing the challenges of the pandemic and its consequences, the transition to a sustainable way of life, and the defense of liberal democracy and decentralized forms of government that are close to citizens. We also call for a bold political decision to enable the regions with legislative powers to act as trusted, constructive partners able to advance, deliberate upon, even reverse and legislate on European policies. We offer commitment, co-responsibility and know-how. I am sincerely grateful for the support of the European Policy Centre. I am also grateful for the participation of all the authorities, as well as the invaluable collaboration of the regions that are part of the RLEG initiative. Together, we can contribute to strengthening the future of this Europe we share. Eskerrik asko, thank you, as we say in Basque. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this important intervention, including concrete proposals on how to involve the regions with legislative power, also in the Conference on the Future of Europe. I'll be now handing over to Alison Hunter, Senior Advisor to the European Policy Center, to present the report the EPC has prepared, which I already referred to in my introduction.
Good morning. Thank you, Fabian. I will just start. There we go. Can you tell me if you can see the screen?
Yes.
You can. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to join this morning, to join this high-level event. My name's Alison Hunter. I'm a Senior Advisor with the EPC and the Study Manager for this assignment. Thank you also to the Basque Government for requesting the study and the analysis. And obviously thank you very much to the many participants who took part in the study, including regions with legislative powers from both Brussels-based actors and domestic officials, EU regional networks, and of course, EU institutions. I have a number of slides here. It's a relatively short presentation, but I hope to give you an overview and a flavour of the key findings of this study. A key question underpinning this study is the one posed here. Can a new effective collaborative effort across the RLEG initiative help to reduce the democratic distance between EU citizens and EU policies and legislation? And before going into the rest of the study, I wanted to share with you that we found a clear relationship between the EU's democratic distance challenge and the effectiveness of its multi-level governance system. And there are a number of points that I think are worth emphasising there. The study unveiled a strong and increasingly centralising approach to EU policy and decision making. This can be observed through a number of means and a number of recent events and incidents. There has been a more political orientation to the Council and to the European Commission, and recent global events provide some striking examples. So, for example, global issues such as trading tensions, security and defence require a strong bloc response and are linked to growing demands for EU sovereignty and autonomy. Also, the EU's response to the health crisis through the commitment to finance the Recovery and Resilience Facility was a highly centralised exercise. Now, there's a compelling rationale for this stance, but its execution has consequences for territories and their citizens, who are often far removed from the decisions affecting them. This challenges the EU's subsidiarity principles, and it fails to acknowledge territorial realities, not least in how places can be impacted by remote decision-making processes. Indeed, citizens are less likely to support political decisions which they perceive have been made without their input and their consent. And while this is the case for all EU regions, this centralising direction presents a particular challenge to regions with legislative powers precisely because of their legal role, responsibilities and accountabilities. Regions in the study expressed a grievance with a perceived lack of consultation from the member state level, as well as a perceived rigidity at the European Commission level regarding how the RLEG regions can engage with and improve upon EU policy and funding decisions at the regional level. And there was often a strong perception of being undermined at the domestic level, creating unmet expectations of how RLEG regions can deliver their legal responsibilities. And in turn, this creates negative impacts on trust, with clear perceptions of a growing distance between EU decision-making and citizens' needs. Some RLEG regions even expressed this as a threat to democracy. This is an accusation which the EU can ill afford, especially when these grievances are voiced by a group of EU project champions. And thirdly, the study argues for a greater recognition, especially across the key actors of the EU's multi-level governance system, of the role that regions with legislative powers can play as strong connectors between the EU project and citizens from regions with legislative powers. RLEG has a key role in supporting efforts to increase the proximity between their citizens and the tools and mechanisms that drive EU legislative and policy processes. This role is derived from the specific rights and responsibilities of these regions through their legislative powers. So a little bit of background to the study method and some related caveats there. The approach to the study, it had a strong qualitative nature and was undertaken over very short timescales. And while this allowed for rather deep insights, it has to be positioned as a work in progress. It requires follow-up action, both within the network and as part of wider outreach and communications efforts to establish a new strategic footing for the RLEG initiative. The whole study was undertaken in October to December last year, a very tight timescale. Now, this placed some restrictions on our ability for stronger outreach to engage different stakeholders in the consultation exercise. And in addition, there was a marked difference in the willingness to engage in the exercise from different stakeholder groups, with some key gaps which we recommend should be filled as a follow-up to this study. I would also add that this was a highly exploratory approach that was undertaken to this study, because the study actually has a very sensitive nature, and we were keen to understand how would people engage with the exercise. And this alone provided important insights about perceptions and beliefs, many of which are from very different perspectives. There is no clear consensus of opinion, either across different stakeholder groups or even within the core group of RLEG regions regarding the specific role for regions with legislative powers. Now, this exercise does not aim to provide answers regarding right or wrong perspectives, but it is to highlight that these often polarised views have led to a dynamic which can prevent positive and meaningful engagement across key stakeholder groups. This is the current reality from which this exercise is drawn, and it implies that a longer-term strategic focus is required in order to help to shift the current dynamic of rather entrenched positions across the multi-level governance system. So a little bit of background to RLEG. Who are they and what do they want to achieve? As has already been said, the initiative was set up in 2018 and it now has 16 current members. It intends to represent the specific interests of regions with legislative powers and has drawn on the much earlier RLEG initiative, which was set up in 2001, representing the interests of then 74 regions from 8 member states. Regions with legislative powers are a particular subset of the wider group of EU regions, and their powers, while very different from each other, are far-reaching. This brings rights, responsibilities and accountabilities for both policy making and outcomes at the regional level. These regions take this very seriously, and they are often frustrated by a perception that other actors, both national and at EU level, in the multi-level governance process do not always appear to acknowledge their status. This slide here is a little bit of an illustration. We've called it a mosaic of regional identities. The quotation marks that you see on this slide illustrate that these are the specific words and terms that were used by these regions to describe their status and function. And this matters because it reflects how these regions identify themselves. RLEG regions do not see themselves in exactly the same way. They have specific histories, identities and powers. And while they have a shared view that they are not the same as regions without legislative powers, they often have unique and differing objectives for what they're seeking and how this might be achieved. They have common values, but with a high degree of differentiation. This can make it tricky to find common cause. areas where differences tend to exist across the RLEG regions are related to three key areas. The extent of domestic legislative powers. For example, there are federal competencies, there's also autonomous status. The capacity to respond to new EU issues where there are concerns about a lack of sub-state engagement. This can limit what can be done collectively across the RLEG initiative. And views concerning the target audience. Some believe that this should be mainly the domestic level, while others felt this should be at the EU level, for example, within the European Commission. Now, this slide here is a rather busy one, but I think it's a pretty important one. These were views that were expressed predominantly by RLEG members, and there are three columns here. The first column, what should RLEG regions do? Now, while these quotes that are noted in the first column are not mutually exclusive, the ideas and the suggestions are not identical. No hierarchy of objectives emerged during the exercise regarding the most important focus or area for RLEG to invest its efforts. This is linked to the study's recommendations about having a more internally focused discussion within the RLEG initiative to create a core and prioritised set of objectives which would support communications and their ongoing narrative. The second column, what does RLEG want to change? The predominant focus of this column reveals that there's a core sense of injustice, ineffectiveness and opposition to how EU policy and decision-making processes currently operate. Indeed, there was more commonality concerning what does not work well. And in turn, this has influenced the image and identity of RLEG from time to time as an initiative with a negative message. This has been somewhat off-putting and indeed counterproductive to the initiative's aim to act as a force for good in the European integration process and in bringing citizens closer to the EU project. The report recommends that this discontent that is felt within the initiative needs to be further shaped in a more positive direction towards solutions which can address the grievances. And the third column reveals both flaws and the impacts of those flaws. Now, the flaws relate to how EU subsidiarity works in practice and a growing disconnect between places at the sub-state level and the EU project. And the impacts of these flaws relate to how ineffective governance limits regional engagement and can generate suboptimal knowledge and evidence about territorial policy needs and outcomes. So going forward, recommendations for resetting the RLEG initiative. I've got two slides I wanted to share with you here, which provide a summary of recommendations within the report. The first generally relates to the internal focus and the preparation work that needs to be done within the RLEG initiative, while the second is about external engagement, particularly focusing on areas of EU policy, which could be very useful for everyone for the RLEG initiative to draw a focus on. So this slide here is about the need to mobilise an internal exercise to revitalise purpose and direction, and setting this onto a more positive and consensual pathway and upgrading external engagement efforts with EU institutions, regional networks and platforms, and the wider group of regions with legislative powers beyond the 16 current members and their domestic actors, especially with a strong focus on the highest levels of political leadership from these regions. This should help with a more inclusive and impactful approach to influencing the future direction of the EU's multi-level governance system, positioned as part of the wider mission linked to the future of Europe. And this slide here recommends actions on the basis of added value that the RLEG members can bring to these areas that are noted below due to their significant expertise, technical skills and the political leadership they can bring to bear. All of these areas noted on this slide have strong links to multi-level governance. Now, it's clear that the EU will require an upgrading of multi-level governance going forward. The RLEG initiative can help to champion this agenda. Notably, the French presidency has placed strong importance on territorial cohesion. This is a significant breakthrough, and it's likely to be echoed in the upcoming 8th cohesion report. the RLEG initiative can bring a new evidence base and momentum to this effort. And to conclude, I think it's fair to say that the RLEG initiative wishes to make a positive and valuable contribution to the future of Europe debate. It can offer long-term, multi-actor engagement, strong capacity and leadership, valuable grassroots evidence and perspectives, as well as a strong outreach function to their regional citizens, facilitating their awareness of, interest and buy-in to both the debate and to the future of Europe. So as a final remark, I would just like to repeat my words of thanks to all who gave us the opportunity to conduct this study and also to share the findings with you today. I reiterate the message at the beginning of my intervention that this is a work in progress, but there is significant opportunity to reset the agenda for the RLEG initiative with the aim of generating benefits and new value for the whole of the EU project and its multi-level governance actors. Thank you very much for your time this morning, and I look forward to the other interventions and to the ongoing discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. Also showing some of the tensions between involving regions with legislative power and the trends and developments at the EU level. I now hand over for the keynote speech to Herman van Rompuy, the President Emeritus of the European Council and also the President of the EPC. Herman, the floor is yours. Sorry, we can't hear you, you're still muted.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, a number of EU countries are de jure or de facto federal states. The autonomy of the regions varies from country to country. Just as there are many social models in the European Union, and it is therefore difficult to speak of the one European social model, it is difficult to speak of a unique model of regionalization or federalization. And we just heard from the report made by the EPC, we have just heard how diverse those different regionalizations are. The reason for arriving at the form of federal state has in the first place to do, or more to do, with recognizing diversity and therefore preserving the unity of the country as a whole than with strengthening democracy. In many countries, autonomy of the regions was just inevitable. However, some fear that autonomy for regions is exactly a preparation for separatism. As mentioned, regional autonomy is often precisely a means of preserving the country's survival by recognizing its diversity. And sometimes language and culture are the reasons for the differentiation, sometimes not. In my country, language is the main basis of the demarcation of regions and of the belonging to a community. But in Germany, it is completely different. The fact of belonging to the European Union or the European community has an impact on regions because membership of the Union and of the Eurozone is restricted to member states, not to regions. A standalone for a region, leaving a country and leaving the Union is almost impossible. After all, the interconnections between state and region are large in modern welfare states with high levels of government involvement. We no longer live in societies with the minimal state, that one can leave or join at little cost. Moreover, the price of leaving the common currency and the common market is very high, and therefore there are no exit candidates outside the UK. There can, of course, be more direct links between regions and the European institutions. That depends on the member states. I already negotiated in my own country 30 years ago the international powers of the federated states. Each region, in my country, has jurisdiction over the international extension of its assigned competencies. And this includes the possibility to conclude international treaties. In the case of mixed EU treaties, all 7 assemblies, parliamentary assemblies in Belgium must give their approval. Apart from one hesitation 5 years ago, this has always gone smoothly. The Federated States of Belgium also participate directly in the EU Council of Ministers, where they have exclusive competence, for instance, agriculture, culture, education. There is a rotation of which region represents Belgium, but all federated states must reach a common position. If they don't, Belgium must even abstain. But I repeat, participation in the European decision-making process is determined by each country. Ladies and gentlemen, regionalization today, however, has also to do with democratization. How to bring power closer to citizens and how to involve citizens more directly in governance. And the Conference on the Future of Europe must above all be about the future of our democracy. It should be itself, the conference, an exercise in democracy. Trust in this pillar of our society is under severe pressure, even in crisis. And not only in Europe, by the way. When we talk about European democracy, we are talking both about democracy in the member states themselves and about the democratic nature of the European institutions. There is a so-called democratic deficit. I don't like the word, but there is a democratic deficit at all levels of power, although to different degrees. Trust has been eroded at all levels of power. Trust must be increased by ambitious promises and expectations, if ambitious promises and expectations are balanced with possibilities and deliverables. In addition to this kind of democratic deficit, legal procedures are pending against 2 countries for violation of the treaties. Many of our citizens do not feel sufficiently protected by all authorities against all kinds of threatening developments, such as unemployment, climate change, irregular migration, costs of living, terrorism, pandemics, corruption, financial instability, military invasion, etc. That have become even more evident since the outbreak of the multiple crises in 2008. We must protect and empower people better in order to restore trust. And many citizens want more input in decision-making and demand more output, better results from policies in all those areas that are their concern for today and for tomorrow. Fear must be transformed into hope. And the digital revolution, in particular, the strong developments of social media, has dramatically changed the functioning of our democracy with its new possibilities to communicate with each other and inform us even better. But those media also undermine traditional communities by a deluge of simplistic slogans, fake news, and by fueling polarization. So work needs to be done to strengthen the European democracy in general. The problem of the EU democracy in a narrow sense of the word is, of course, in the first place, its lack of proximity and of the sense of belonging. Within itself, members of a demos are willing to exhibit a higher level of solidarity. With business and work commuting, with a common currency, tourism, cultural exchanges, Erasmus schemes, even continental sport events, European identity is slowly emerging. This process cannot be rushed. Our identity contains many layers, beginning with the local and the region. The younger generation who grew up in a more open world makes us hopeful. This strengthening of European democracy at large, I mean in the member states and in the EU institutions, should be done in the first place within the current treaties and by a dynamic interpretation of the text. Admittedly, each country organizes regional level differently, and its organization is fully a matter of national sovereignty. Citizens themselves should be given more opportunities to get involved in determining the direction in which the Union wishes to go through new forms of responsible participation and constructive involvement. It is often called deliberative or participatory democracy. All levels of power can learn from the experience of the Conference on the Future of Europe in this respect. I'm referring to the digital panels, to citizens' platforms, and other instruments. Under no circumstances should the conference itself be a one-off event. It must become a repetitive way of reaching out to the citizens. The strengthening of European democracy in the broad sense must come from the bottom up, through a greater democratic empowerment of the citizens and through local and regional elected representatives, in whom many citizens have greater confidence than other political mandatories. Moreover, they constitute a group of around 1 million people, those directly elected local and regional representatives. Those representatives, they can bridge the distance in an organic way and improve proximity, both between the people and Brussels, as well as among the peoples of Europe. Representative democracy remains the cornerstone of our political system. Of course, I speak about a well-connected, listening, representative democracy open to dialogue. By the way, democracy must once again become a conversation in which people listen to each other, in which there is a concern for the common good, in which moderation and respect prevail. This dialogue must take place between citizens and elected politicians, between citizens themselves and between local, regional, national, and European authorities. The EU must finally move towards multi-level governance, in which all levels of government cooperate with each other and with the European level. In the name of the principle of subsidiarity, local and regional authorities could be more and better consulted, especially at the beginning of the legislative processes, and they can be better involved in the implementation of European policies. They can provide valuable feedback on the quality and efficiency of the solutions so that those solutions can be improved. Those local and regional political representatives, they can more easily involve citizens in the functioning of democracy at all levels of power. Ladies and gentlemen, the Committee of the Regions has an indispensable role of coordinator and facilitator in all of the above. The Committee of Regions itself must play an ambitious role within the current treaties in the preparation, the decision-making, the implementation, and the feedback on of European legislation. An interinstitutional agreement must be reached on this with the European Commission so that the positions of the Committee of the Regions can be taken better into account. If the Commission does not agree, it should also say why. The Committee of the Regions itself must dare to reconsider its own functioning in this light, to improve its own efficiency and its own impact. Another idea, the EU could also examine the possibility of creating a big tent forum where randomly selected citizens and elected representatives from different policy levels, from the EU to the regional and the local, so they get together to discuss the EU strategic agenda for the next term of the institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, a stronger EU, inside and outside stronger, is a more democratic EU, and vice versa. The basic requirement for translating these ideas into action is to make the Conference on the Future of Europe a success. If necessary, more time than anticipated may be needed for this. Things should not be rushed because much is at stake. Much is at stake. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Herman, for highlighting the aspects of multi-level governance and democracy, and also making the direct link to the Conference on the Future of Europe. We now turn to Alain Lamassoure, former member of the European Parliament. He was already referred to, and I think he's going to go into a bit more detail also on his concept of associated regions. Alain, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Lenda Kari, dear Herman Van Rompuy. Giving the regions a fair place in the European architecture is not a new concern. The Committee of Regions, which was just mentioned eloquently by Herman Van Rompuy, will celebrate its 30th birthday in 2 years' time. But if, on the initiative of Lenda Kari Urkuyu, the question is being raised again today, it is because of the failure of the Committee of Regions. The quality of its work is not in question. It suffers from a congenital defect. Its composition does not correspond to its role, nor even to its name. It brings together elected representatives of territorial authorities distributed by country in proportion to the number of inhabitants, but it's up to each country to choose the levels of authority. Regions, of course, but also provinces, departments, towns, villages even. Now, as it has been said by Herman Van Rompuy, each of our countries has a different territorial organization with very different levels of decentralization. Federalism is the common system in Germany, Austria and Belgium, but it is far from leading to a single model of governance. Indeed, while certain historical communities in the Kingdom of Spain have far more powers than the German region that bears the proud name of Free State of Bavaria. As a result, the Committee of Region is a kind of unrepresentative institutional lobby. Its opinion only influences the work of the European legislator to a limited extent, if not by chance. And yet, the diagnosis made at the time has only been confirmed today. And this has also been demonstrated by the EPC study. 3/4 of European regulations are implemented, and sometimes managed at a subnational level, while the whole construction is supposed to be based on subsidiarity, so it is at odds with it. This situation led us to raise the issue before the Convention on the Future of Europe in 2003. It will be remembered that this convention was composed of representatives of the European institutions and all national parliaments. It was charged with drawing up a draft constitutional treaty. Its work led to the current Treaty of Lisbon, which has been in force since 2009. At the time, a group of MEPs proposed introducing a status of partner regions of the Union to take into account the role of these regions in the implementation of European policies. They would have had several rights. The right to be consulted by the European Commission whenever it is preparing a proposal for legislation in an area that falls within their competence in their own territory, the right to directly negotiate and conclude agreements with the Commission for the management of structural and cohesion funds from which they may benefit, the right to refer to the Court of Justice in Luxembourg if the European institutions fail to recognize their powers and competences, to reassure national governments and to make clear it was not a war machine against national states. We had foreseen that it would be up to each state to designate which of its own territorial authorities would be included in the list. In our mind, the federal countries would have retained all their regions. Spain would have had to choose between all its regional communities or just the historical ones. Italy, well, for example, its alpine and inland regions. Finland, the island archipelago, Portugal, its Atlantic islands, and France, probably Corsica. But it was up to each and every one to decide. In the political situation at the time, it was not possible to obtain the necessary unanimity of the 15 member states back in the day. The 13 candidate countries had the status of observers to the convention and the possibility of relinquishing certain powers that they did not yet have was not their priorities. As a result, our mountain gave birth to a tiny mouse, as we say in French, the right of referral to the Court of Justice by the Committee of Regions alone. So why should we raise this issue again in 2022? And why are our odds better? Well, simply because in 20 years' time, the needs have only increased. On the one hand, the European Union has considerably increased its area of legislative interventions. New competences have been given to the EU by treaties. They have increased by reinforced cooperation. The Commission is now supported by more than 30 European agencies spread across all countries. There are several in Spain, and these agencies have analysis, control, and even management roles in very different fields. Working conditions, lifelong learning, fisheries, control, food safety, chemical products, prevention of contagious diseases, not to forget Europol, Eurojust, and Frontex. On the other hand, in almost all countries, the transfer of competences from the state to local authorities has also increased over the last 20 years. New organizations have emerged, particularly to take into account the development of large urban areas, which have become the main engines of growth in the 21st century. For example, even though France remains a centralized country, well, in 20 years' time, the number of local civil servants and regional civil servants has increased by almost 50%, while the number of state civil servants has remained stable. In layman's terms, the institutional landscape has changed. Finally, everywhere, the need for citizen participation has increased a lot. And there are two ways of responding to these legitimate aspirations from citizens. First, there is the fashionable one, i.e. organizing consultations of citizens selected at random. considering that a statistical sample is more representative of the real people than their elected representatives. But this is a deception. The second method is the right one. It is based on representative democracy, not only on an ephemeral and unaccountable sample, but on the contrary, on a chain of elected assemblies. In matters of law, the closest to the citizens is the regional assembly. And where there are areas of shared competence between Europe and the regions, well, regions must take part in accordance with their duties and responsibilities. This is very important when we talk about participatory democracy, because it is precisely integrated into the exercise that has been underway in Brussels since last year, the Conference on the Future of Europe. This time, the objective is not to draft a treaty, but to gather all opinions of all actors of the European life, both on the content and the direction of European policies and on on the way it operates. And two of these citizens' panels have been set up, and it would be abnormal and for me scandalous to see that the voice of elected representatives closest to the citizens would not be listened to, while some anonymous people represent themselves and themselves only, and would be, well, the main people we talk about in social media and in mainstream media. And if today we go ahead with this exercise, it is because it is very timely. Today, all political families will draw are drawing their programs for the next European elections, and the campaign will start at the end of next year. Furthermore, this project is not longer supported by a few elected representatives, but by a vast network of regions from different countries. And we need to expand this network to have more levers with the different layers of authority. What's more, we have some clear criteria in our favor. Finally, the desired results can only be achieved by other legal means than changing the basic European treaties. And there is a true transnational political will in that sense to make the treaties evolve. But we need to agree on the way treaties are interpreted, and also to find new pathways. Herman Van Rompuy remembers he played a key role during the Eurozone crisis, and, well, he adapted an article from the Treaty of Maastricht, and this was supplemented with an intergovernmental agreement, and the ECB's wise policy did the rest. More recently, in the summer of 2020, all governments agreed to conduct joint medical research and vaccine procurement without any pre-existing legal basis. Outside periods of acute crisis, there are also flexible procedures which allow for different situations in the member states to be taken into account, and I will mention two things. First, we have the interinstitutional agreement. It is an astonishing legal curiosity, a gentleman's agreement between the three EU institutions. Although it has no legal force, such an agreement has provided the binding framework for the European budget over 20 years' time, and it is entirely possible to conceive another work framework for commissions, governments and concerned regions on this topic we are addressing today. And this would be a process reminiscent of the so-called Bologna process, launched in 1997 by a network of universities, taken up by the Council of Europe, and then by a series of ministerial conferences. This highly original process on the fringes of the EU led to the creation of the European higher education area in 2010. Another example, the enhanced cooperation. This is a procedure which is in the treaties. If in an area of shared competences some member states want to take new actions quickly without waiting for the others, they can do so under a streamlined procedure within the EU. There are currently half a dozen such procedures covering a wide range of subjects, from the settlement of disputes in binational divorces to the establishment of European Public Prosecutor. In conclusion, let me support the recommendations made by the EPC and its excellent report. From a tactical point of view, the promoters of RLEG have an interest in presenting themselves not as beggars for rights, but as providers of constructive proposals. The three concrete examples given seem to me very relevant. The European semester's procedure is now well established, but has also revealed its limit in the current composition. As long as it lacks a real regional component, the better regulation approach is a real nuisance to everyone, and by definition, the regions are best placed to participate in territorial impact assessments of European policies. The more we work on Europe, the more we realize the true significance of its motto, united in diversity. Union and diversity are not achievements that can be considered as carved into marble. They are fragile plants. Both need to grow much higher, and Europe needs more union and more diversity. Europe exists because it is diverse. It acts because it is united. If it is not united enough, it will remain powerless. If it does not increase its diversity, it will no longer exist. I remain at the disposal of the network to continue this adventure, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for highlighting the importance of representative democracy and raising the question of treaty change as well. And thank you also for the appreciation of the EPC report. We will now turn to Vice President of the European Commission, Maroš Šefčovič. Unfortunately, he can't be with us in person, but we will have a video message from him. Just to remind the audience that you can raise some questions in the chat area, and we will come to the questions after we've heard this video message. Thank you very much.
Regions with legislative powers play their full role in decision-making in the European Union. As you point out yourselves, there is no EU without its regions. I also welcome the study being presented today by the European Policy Center. It recognizes the need for the EU policymaking to respond as closely as possible to the demands and expectations of. It is a pleasure to speak to you today, even if it cannot be in person. I support the work of the RLEG initiative in ensuring that regions with legislative powers play their full role in decision-making in the European Union. As you point out yourselves, there is no EU without its regions. I also welcome the study being presented today by the European Policy Center. It recognizes the need for the EU policymaking to respond as closely as possible to the demands and expectations of Europeans and European businesses. And within that, it underlines the major role regions have to play in delivering on those policies, with, for example, almost 2/3 of public investment into the energy and climate transitions being undertaken at regional level. As we look to accelerate our recovery from pandemic, we must ensure that all corners of the Union can benefit from the opportunities offered by the green and digital transitions. Different parts of the EU were affected by the coronavirus pandemic in different ways and to varying extents. For instance, regions that are heavily dependent on a few manufacturing or service sectors turn out to be particularly vulnerable. We therefore need to draw the right lessons from the crisis by strengthening the resilience of regions in response to unexpected shocks. That is why we will increasingly take regional specificities into account in the next European semester country reports. For example, the regional dimension is also reflected in our resilience dashboards, a new tool allowing us to monitor member states' resilience in a holistic manner. Above all, I want to underline the importance the Commission places on consulting all key stakeholders, including at the regional and local level, when it comes to better policy making. I know that the EPC study reflects on the need to improve the EU's multi-level governance systems, which is an important policy goal. Many of you have voiced concerns about the risk of increasing centralizations in the EU decision-making process, in particular with reference to cohesion policy and the negotiations on the national recovery and resilience plans under the next generation EU instrument. On this, I want to reassure you that the Commission attaches the utmost importance to the partnership principle, pandemic or no pandemic. As regards cohesion policy, there is a strong tradition of partnership and multi-level governance in implementing key policies and ensuring European objectives are translated into feasible and tangible regional actions. Additionally, the Commission requires action where breaches in the Code of Conduct on Partnership are identified. For the recovery and resilience facilities, the Commission insisted that Member States should engage in a broad policy dialogue with all relevant partners. The facility can only be successful if implemented with a strong local and regional ownership of the process, together with support from social partners and civil society at every step. Here, I also want to underline that the EU's better regulation framework provides regions with plenty of ways to influence European legislation. You can participate in public consultations on the design of roadmaps or just before a legislative proposal is launched. You can work closely with the Committee of Regions, including through the REG Hub 2.0, but also through our recently established Fit for Future platform, helping to simplify and future-proof EU legislation. And you can engage in direct contact with the EU institutions as well. Here in particular, I want to highlight territorial impact assessments. These represent an important tool to raise awareness about the impacts of the EU policies and legislative initiatives on our regions and cities. And I would urge you to make full use of them. This is of particular relevance to regions with legislative powers. Regional engagement needs to cover the entire policy cycle from legislative development to the demonstration of policy impact. Moreover, as regards the overarching goal of improving the EU's multi-level governance system, I think strategic foresight can be useful to show the way forward. Europe is facing massive transformations and technological developments at an unprecedented scale. Some 21 million workers may need to move to new occupations by 2030, with most going to the jobs that do not even exist yet. Artificial intelligence alone has the potential to add up to 3.6 trillion euros to the European economy in the same time frame. Tailor-made solutions capturing the strengths of each region will therefore be necessary for ensuring an economy that is resilient and fit for the future. This is why I would like to invite you and your best and brightest minds to join a broad reflection, which I will launch in the coming weeks, on the long-term implications of a more effective multi-level governance in the EU. This foresight exercise should look, for example, at innovation pathways and industrial initiatives led by European regions, which will be key for Europe's open strategic autonomy by 2050. I have recently discussed this idea of regions as innovation hubs with the legendary Inigo Urkulu when I attended the dialogue on future of science and innovation in Bilbao last year. There, I was impressed by the Basque country as a clear example of an EU region with a strong commitment to innovation and industrial policy. Industry represents 25% of its GDP, well above the Spanish and EU average. And the local government is now focusing on developing Industry 4.0 initiatives in its regional innovation policy. There are many other regions in RLEG which are frontrunners in industrial innovation, like Catalonia, Flanders, or Upper Austria. I thus see a lot of potential for developing a network of innovation hubs throughout Europe. Let me conclude on the conference on the future of Europe. You have my thanks as European regions for your active engagement with the conference, not just on questions of governance, but on substantive questions of policy as well. This is very important. Regions have a key role to play in the conference. As policymakers, you are closer to citizens and know better what matters to them on the ground rather than on a paper. I thus welcome your proposals to the conference for a more effective multi-level governance in the EU, including in the RLEG political declaration, which the lehendakari mentioned earlier. I am also pleased that 30 representatives from local and regional government will participate in the plenary. I am sure that they will provide valuable insights as crucial partners in the pursuit of common European goals and in the implementation of key policies. I can assure you that my colleagues across the Commission share my hope and determination that Europeans will see their thoughts, opinions and ideas taken seriously by decision makers. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you an enjoyable and productive event.
Thank you. We will pass our thanks on to the Vice President. An interesting call there for more effective multi-level governance, and looking forward to also engaging in the exercise the Commission is launching. We now have about 15 minutes for some questions and answers. What I'm going to do is I'm gonna go to each one of the initial presentations with a question in the order of the interventions we have had. And I would invite also the others to react to whatever question they feel they would want to comment on. But I will start with the lehendakari in terms of what this would do to the European decision-making process. In a way, this is about having more actors, more processes, more consultation. Is that not a danger that you would end up with a more ineffective system, that it would be more bureaucratic, and that it might end up with blocking more action at the European level, which already is a problem. There seems to be more blocking power every year in terms of making progress. So what would the added value be of having the RLEG regions involved more in the decision-making process? And that goes to the lehendakari in the first instance.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much for that question. To begin, I'd say that if the search for simplicity were the criteria to be considered, the European Union would never have seen the light of day. The process of integration is complex, cumbersome, slow at times, but also it gives us positive results, and it's brought us the longest period of peace and prosperity in our history. Having said that, I share the 3 reasons that support this demand that we make regarding a new place for regions and nations with broad political and legislative competencies in the EU's institutional architecture and political cycle. The first, in practical or efficiency terms, our participation in the European policy-making cycle and legislative initiatives will result in better policies, better public policies, evidence-based policies, more grounded to the reality on the ground and adapted to Europe's territorial diversity. To give an example, the pandemic. That pandemic is affecting the whole of the EU, but its consequences are felt very differently depending on the different sociological realities, productive specialization, labor market, organizations in the different EU territories. If we give a voice to those of us who are managing the recovery on the ground, it will be possible to move away from miracle, magic recipes and develop tailor-made responses. And the second reason is that we are key transformation agents. We've shown that we are able to permeate global proposals and bring them down and bring together public and private and public social collaboration, which is necessary to face any change with guarantees. An example of this is the experience of the Basque government. We've approved our own Basque Green Deal, and that's weaving now a network of alliances around projects and initiatives aimed at promoting a green transition in the Basque country. And the third reason, our proposal is to strengthen the legitimacy of the European project. We cannot overlook that in the EU, there are composite states. And in these states, the governments gathered around RLEG initiative have those powers that are shared with European institutions. So if we can include in the decision-making forums these holders of powers, especially those of us that promote policies and promote legislation, means a deepening of the transparency and democracy of the European project.
Thanks very much. I'll now turn to Alison, and I want to ask about the two-way nature of this. This is not just about making changes at the European level, it also requires the regions to be active, to be engaged. And I'm also wondering what would happen if only some of the regions who are involved in this would be engaged, whereas others wouldn't be. So what is required of the regions in this?
Thanks, Fabian. Well, when we say what is required of the regions, I think we need to be clear who we're talking about. This piece of work and this event today is very much about the regions with legislative powers, but as has been said very clearly in the report, that's a subset of the wider group of regions and local authorities, and they are still part of this equation. But taking the RLEG, the regions with legislative powers, taking them first and foremost, I think as we've said quite clearly in the report and today, there is a huge aptitude, a huge appetite for greater engagement, certainly from those regions that we have spoken with. But there will need to be, I suppose, a bit more of the engagement at the highest political levels across the RLEG initiative to take on board what some of this change actually means. Not just for those RLEG regions, but for regions and local authorities and territories as a whole. And I think with that comes this idea of being more proactive. And one of the things that I think actually was said by Herman Van Rompuy was that RLEs should be more and better consulted, and they need to be able to provide feedback and find the space to provide that feedback. I would go further than that. They actually have to be much more proactive, which means they have to be more mobilised, they have to be better coordinated, and that's within the RLEG initiative and that wider group of regions, but in collaboration with the wider regional networks that we have. But that alone won't answer the problems that we face. And I think if we go back to the Recovery and Resilience Facility and its underlying focus and ambition on reform of our territories, we also need to address reform of the multi-level governance system. And if we don't address this in a holistic and pervasive way, we can hardly expect those reforms at a territorial level to take place. So I think the answer to your question is much, much more pervasive than that. It takes efforts at all levels. It certainly takes political momentum. And it takes a lot of bravery, and that bravery will have to come from all quarters. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Turning to Herman, a question, you mentioned the Committee of the Regions. The question really is, how does this fit with the existing architecture of the European Union? We already have an institution which represents regions. Is there not a danger if there's also a distinction made between the regions with legislative powers and those who don't have those powers? You need to unmute yourself.
We have a committee of the regions. It is even enshrined in the EU treaties, in the Treaty of Lisbon. But of course, the Committee of the Regions has put an exercise into motion of what is its role. And Alain Lamassoure was rightly pointing out that this role can be improved a lot. And that's why the Committee of the Regions is highly involved now in the Conference on the Future of Europe, in order to strengthen its own role. But at the same time, the committee has to undertake another exercise, an exercise internally, how to improve its own efficiency, how to improve the impact they can have outside by making the committee much more efficient inside. And that's an exercise that is, the necessity of this exercise is acknowledged by the committee itself. Well, my fear of the idea of having a separate channel, a separate way of direct links between regions with legislative powers and the EU institutions alongside the Committee of the Regions is a double one. First of all, in some countries, it will be extremely difficult to make a choice between those countries, those regions that can participate in this separate channel of direct contact between regions and EU institutions. So Alain was mentioning Corsica. I can imagine that other regions in France are not happy with that. In Belgium, it's not a problem. We will take them all. In Austria, it can be also very complicated. So you provoke an internal debate inside all those countries, and it can end in just nothing. The second exercise, or the second attempt that can be made is, can those regions with legislative power inside the Committee of the Region have a better status? And that is worthwhile to have that kind of debate inside the Committee of the Regions. Of course, there will also be a debate about regions of the first degree and regions of the second degree. We have to be very aware of that. But there is a debate that is worthwhile to conduct and see where it ends. I personally, I think that we must work as much as possible within the current structures in order to get a result. It could be that I'm too pragmatic. So working via the Committee of the Regions, strengthen the powers of the Committee of the Regions, and inside the committee, trying to reinforce the position of those regions with legislative powers. And I can say it easily because I'm a Flemish. I was at the roots of the creation of the autonomy of the Flemish region and the Dutch-speaking community. So I have no problems with that. I see what kind of reactions that can provoke, but there are arguments to strengthen the position of those regions with legislative powers within the Committee of the Regions. Setting up a separate channel will, I think, not only be extremely difficult, but almost impossible. So being pragmatic so that the voice of regions are heard in Europe much better than they do in the past 30 years. So that's my take is more inspired by political, let's say, political constraints that I see. I want to push for a solution to get involved regions much better in the European decision making than in previous times. I add one thought is that the regions and also the local authorities are best placed to organize the dialogue with the citizens. And so here, the regional and local elected people are on the first line to organize direct dialogue with citizens. Of course, they themselves have to be listened by their own member states and by the European Union. But in this new attempt of having a stronger deliberative and participatory democracy involving citizens, the best way to do so is asking local and regional authorities to get heavily involved in this. They know the people, they can organize those panels and those consultations best. So I see a lot of potential in strengthening European democracy via local and via regional authorities.
Thank you very much, Herman. And you also addressed one of the questions in the chat, which was on how to improve citizens' participation with your last remarks about having the regions organize that. Now, finally turning to Alain in this round. And the question I want to pose to you is, what do you see as the main obstacles to making some changes to improving multi-level governance as we have discussed? And do you think it is likely that member states are willing to make these changes?
En ce qui concerne les obstacles, comme je l'indiquais tout à l'heure,
as I said before, the very first time that we spoke about this matter, it was at the Convention for the Future of Europe. We met some opposition from the member states. At the time, the political context was very different. Even in Spain, there was a very complicated situation with the Basque Country, with the terrorist movement ETA at the time. And it is only because that situation is now over and that there was support from the Lenda Carry of Euskadi at the time that this initiative has started again. It started from a region where there was a big problem at the time. So what was an obstacle is now an asset, you see. Now, we should expect the following. Some countries which are very centralized, or some countries that actually fear some independentists or nationalist movements. Well, these countries would have their doubts about this. And I see that even in my own country, which is France, well, every time that we're proposing to show or put the regions at the forefront, there's this own reaction, you know. This is a Jacobin reaction that we have in France, that's how we call it. And they remind us that the French Constitution, at Article 1, it is said that is one republic, which is indivisible. And in France, we get confused, we get mixed up between unity and uniformity, which is a complete mistake. And actually, I truly believe that we are now at a time that what is true at the European level first was true at the national level. So unity and diversity. So if we want to bring our peoples together, we need to recognize their diversity. And it could be cultural diversity, religious diversity, or regional diversity. However, this remains a harsh debate that we must have. And again, we should expect some opposition from some member states. I would take just another example. In the 1990s, when I was a French Minister of European Affairs, and after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, where all countries from Central and Eastern Europe recovered their freedom and democracy, while one of the problems they had was the importance of national minorities, religious minorities, ethnic minorities. Well, we worked to make sure that these countries would actually join the Framework Convention on the Rights of National Minorities in the Council of Europe. So that's not the EU, that's the Council of Europe. So I went to the capital cities of these countries to actually speak to them, to make sure they would adopt this Framework Convention, and they did. But in my own country, as I speak today, that text has not been signed or ratified, because France believes that because of its constitution, there is no minority in our country, you see. So it's about education. Now, I think that people change, and as I said in my introduction, even in France, people change. In the last 20 years, the trend has been different. We've been getting closer to citizens, to be more concrete, to be more efficient. There's been transfers of competencies to the regional level or local level. Now, if you may, I would like to add one point. One element of interests. This element could contribute to the work currently done by the RLEG regions. So, beyond the relations with the European Union, we also see another possibility. You know, when these regions learn to work together, and Herman Van Rompuy is right, Mr. Van Rompuy is right, the easiest thing would be to have them work better together at the Committee of the Regions. Of course, and that's a debate we need to have, but your analysis is very good. So one great advantage would be that we would use the experience of each other, would learn from each other's experience. What strikes me is that in our European Union, the most federalists are the most Eurosceptical ones. We all underestimate the advantage that we could draw from each other if we actually better know what's happening in the neighboring countries. We need to know what's happening in our neighbors. So we need to learn from that and see what went well in our neighbors' countries where we failed sometimes. I'll give you two examples of that, two different themes. It's about learning.
Sorry,
It's
just
about...
to say we're a bit tight on time, so...
J'achève.
Yes, I will finish. It's about learning. In France, we've tried to improve our education system for 30 years. In other countries, especially other regions where they've been able to run other systems. We need to get inspired by that. And another theme, it's about the integration of migrants, people coming from abroad, displaced people too. There are some regions with local municipalities who know how to do it, when many regions have no idea about that. So let's keep that in mind, because if we work together, we'll be more efficient, we'll be better heard when we write the European policies, but it could be very enriching, very interesting, because we learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and apologies for having to move things on, but we need to now get to the last part of the event, which is statements of presidents of regions with legislative powers. These are very much speed statements, so we have 3 minutes each. We'll start with a live intervention by Harry Jansson, who's the deputy head of the Åland government.
Thank you very much. Let's see if we can get the camera functioning. Is this controlled by you? Lovely.
We can see you now.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you, moderator. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And also a big thank you to the colleagues from the Basque Country for arranging this very important event. This year, the autonomous and demilitarized Åland Islands celebrate 100 years of autonomy. The road to our autonomy wasn't an easy one, and the final result, a compromise by the League of Nations in Geneva, 1921, was first seen as a terrible loss for Åland, as we were denied our will to reunite with the Swedish kingdom. However, at the very first meeting of the Åland Parliament back in 1922, there was of course a great sense of sadness, but the spirit was still clear. It is time to get to work. And that's really what the Ålanders did. Thanks to the autonomy, we have been able to build a society shaped by a solid spirit of cooperation, where the connection between citizens and politicians has always been strong. We are convinced that this clear connection between decision makers and citizens is key in building a fully democratic and well-functioning society. This is a lesson I do believe the EU needs to learn as well. We are a proud shipping nation, and international cooperation is in our DNA. The EU is therefore hugely important, and it is natural for us to be a constructive member of this union. However, it remains clear that there's a big black hole when it comes to the decision-making process in the EU. A union where the member state and commission run the agenda does simply not reflect the reality on the ground in our very diverse union. For us on the Åland Islands and for many other regions and autonomies with legislative powers, it's obvious that citizens feel very closely connected to the regional parliaments and governments. But when it comes to the decision-making in the EU, this level of government has no real say. Dear colleagues, representatives of the EU institution, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a better EU. An EU where the principle of subsidiarity no longer is just a theoretical concept, but a real guiding principle. An EU where the text of the treaty is clearly pointing out the requirement for the EU to respect regional autonomy is fully complied with. And an EU where all levels of government has a real say in the decision-making process. If this can be achieved, we will see a union that's more efficient and has a higher legitimacy among the citizens. We on the Åland Islands are ready to do what we can to contribute to such a development, and I'm sure the same goes for my colleagues here today. So let us do what the very first Åland Parliament did back in 1922. Let's get back to work. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we now have a series of video messages. And we will start with José Manuel Bolero, who's the president of the Azorian government.
Alto nível,
I'd
organizado pelo País Basco, pelo European Policy Center. Uma saudação em particular a este evento que procura fazer uma grande reflexão neste quadro da Conferência sobre o Futuro da Europa. Nos Açores e a partir dos Açores, o estímulo para o sucesso dos trabalhos. Nós somos uma região que, com certeza, no quadro de uma União Europeia, verdadeiramente uma Europa de regiões, que é uma região robusta, com poderes legislativos, com parlamento próprio, tem especial sensibilidade para esta reflexão. O princípio da subsidiariedade é bom exemplo.
The principle of subsidiarity is a very good example. We need to make sure that it is duly implemented by those that are closest to the people. Strong regions have a duty and an opportunity that needs to be duly grasped, and they need to be heard by policymakers in Europe. Let me mention the POSEI program, which is a direct link that is tailored to the regions. We are all equal in the framework, in the context of the Committee of the Regions, but at the same time, we are very different in our specificities, and we must promote this idea of strong, robust regions. On behalf of the Azores, I'd like to launch a challenge to all of you. Let's make sure that next time, instead of meeting virtually, we can meet in person. Let's meet in person in the Azores to reinforce regions. Let's reflect on our political reality. And let's also reflect on the integration in Europe.
Thank you very much. Now turning to Francina Armengol, who's the president of the Balearic Islands.
Dear Linda Gatti, presidents, in the Balearic Islands, we believe that for territories to evolve and to reinforce cohesion, the Europe of the future needs to be built from dialogue and participation, and above all, from proximity. Listening to its citizens and territories, the European regions with legislative power represent almost half of the European Union population, and meetings like today's meeting are a great opportunity not only to talk about the needs of the regions, but also to join forces and make sure that the voice of our citizens is heard loud and clear in the European institutions. We live in a globalized world, and this has been clearly seen in the context of the pandemic. The challenges that the Union is facing are real and have local implications, and that's why our regionals have to have the best fit in the architecture of the EU. The answers must also stem from the local sphere, listening to those that are closest to people. For a region like the Balearic Islands, it is essential to face two key challenges. The first has to do with insularity. I'm referring to the extra costs for companies, citizens, and public services.
This is why we work within Europe to approve the EU Insularity Statute that would help to promote the progress of 15 million citizens in the EU. Second challenge is the environmental challenge in a territory as vulnerable as ours to climate change. Here we have promoted pioneering, trailblazing laws, but only from the EU and legislative coordination will we be able to eliminate plastics and litter from our seas, curb emissions that pollute our planet, and achieve our objective effectively. Conference on the Future of Europe is the great opportunity for the regions with legislative powers to participate in the design of the Europe we are willing to promote. Thanks very much, Linda Cari.
Thank you very much. Turning to the President of the Government of Catalonia, Herr Aragonés y García.
I'd like to thank the representatives of the Commission. I'd like to thank Alain Lamassoure, the former president of the European Council. I'd like to thank you all for your participation. Catalonia has always been committed to building an EU without borders, without boundaries, with a single market that is both prosperous and solidarity-based, that promotes social and environmental justice, that is respectful of the diversity of the peoples. And we've seen a clear trend towards centralization during the past years. We've seen this trend in some European policies. The Next Generation funds are an example of how the management of a policy only through the governments of member states will reduce the effectiveness of the implementation. That's why we call for a greater role of regional authorities with legislative powers. And we see that many times these are more in line with the principles of the European Commission than the member states. The principles of multi-level governance and subsidiarity, in our opinion, contribute to achieving more effective European policies with a greater impact on our territory and society due to the increased proximity to citizens, associations, companies, and their needs. We believe that the Conference on the Future of Europe is an opportunity to ensure that regions with legislative powers have a role to play in the design and execution of future EU policies. Through this, we can ensure a more effective multi-level government that represents Europe's across all its dimensions in order to ensure a more effective implementation of EU policies. Regions with legislative power are often responsible for the enforcement of European regulations and territories. We are agents of change. We are an integral part of the EU. The future of Europe is our future, and we want to have a voice in it. We want to have a say. Only then will we achieve a more prosperous Europe. The Catalan government wants to work with the regions that share the same concerns and consequently help to reverse that trend by member states towards centralization of decisions taken at a European level. We are facing an opportunity that we cannot miss out on. We are convinced pro-Europeans. We will continue to work with the authorities present today and with all European institutions to ensure that we build a post-COVID Europe that is more social and greener.
Thank you very much. Now turning to the President of the Regional Assembly of Corsica, Maria Antoinette Maupertuis.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear presence, dear MEPs, Mr. Linda Cari, dear friends, I'd like to take this opportunity to wish you a happy new year. May 2022 be a joyful year. May it allow us all to work together peacefully and to implement our projects. Pace, salute, peace and health, as we say in Corsican, above all health in this time of pandemic. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting us as observers. And I would like to thank in particular the Linda Cari Urcuyu and Marianne Alforza, who created this group as well as the Brussels office of the Basque Country in Brussels, which is working relentlessly to ensure that this initiative produces the influence it deserves. Although Corsica is an observer, it fully supports the objectives and content of the joint declaration, and I will make sure, as a member of the Committee of the Regions and Vice President of the COTER, the Committee of the Regions and Regional National Cooperation Parliaments, that this is related to the MEPs, national parliaments, but also the EU Parliament, thanks to MEPs. As you know, your regions and RLEG are a source of inspiration for us insofar as we are on the same path, the path of autonomy, full of right and exercise, requested for over half a century by our people. And it is so necessary for an island in which have mountains and a rural area. We are working on this today at the Corsican Assembly in the framework of the Commission on Statutory Evolution of Corsica. Elected representatives work with us with experts, local stakeholders on the territory. We're working hand in hand with the regions, with the chief powers in the framework of RLEG, and it's for us a way to look into the future with the strong conviction that the regions have an important voice in Europe. Thank you.
And turning to Jean Jambon, Minister President of the Government of Flanders. And last but not least, Simo Puy, who's the President of the Government of Valencia.
Nendakari, former President of the European Council, dear Alain Lamoureux, representatives of European regions and regional parliaments, ladies, gentlemen, good morning. Thanks very much for allowing me to participate in this forum. Who doubted that Europe is, above all, its regions? Who believed that the regions were minor instances in the European construction process? Who thought that Europe had already been completely built? Dear friends, dear colleagues, the pandemic has changed it all. This crisis is reflecting the importance of reinforcing our federalizing vision, an evolution that invigorates the role of regions in the EU. For 2 years now, regions have been showing an unprecedented role in COVID protection measures, in vaccination efforts, and the economic recovery process. So, in line with this reality, we need to recognize regions further in the process of consultations, in the process of decision-making, and in the political actions of the Union. We need to move towards a new Europe for a new era. And today, I propose that we consider a new mechanism. It is now time to go beyond the Lisbon Treaty, to go a step further. Regions need to contribute to a multi-level, more decentralized governance because, ladies, gentlemen, no centralism is intelligent, not even in our regions or our states, nor in the EU. It is now high time for regions to have a more concrete, tangible, real participation. It's not just about stretching, extending democracy, deepening democracy. It's also about gaining efficiency. From the proximity of a lander, a region, or an autonomous community, the challenges can be solved better, more effectively. If Europe is based on a federal vision of the states, and so it shall be, Europe must go one step further, must increase the federal conception with its regions. In this sense, today, as president of the Valencian region, I call upon the network of regions with legislative powers. I propose that we create a European regional policy forum, a public policy forum that allows us to share innovative experiences that can be successfully replicated across regions. And let's pay attention to the execution of the European Next Gen funds. This is of vital importance to make sure that Europe progresses further. And there's great complexity in the distribution of funds. It's this critical for the decade of opportunities. And I offer you the Valencian community as a host venue for this first forum. We want to have a forum that helps to bring Europe closer. Let's be vaccinated against centrifugal tensions and national populism. Let's make sure that we promote loyalty conquered and the federal trust. Let's look to defend our interests, the interests of others, because Europe needs to be a representation of all of us. Otherwise, it won't be the Europe we dream of. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. It's very difficult to draw conclusions from such a broad and interesting discussion. I think what is clear is that there is an important issue which needs to be addressed, and that there needs to be an open debate on how to improve multi-level governance in the European Union, and how to involve different levels of government, including the citizens they serve, in the debates, including in the debate on the future of the European Union. We've heard many constructive suggestions about what can be done, and I'm looking forward to continue this debate, because that's certainly one conclusion I can draw, that this is the start of a process rather than the end. So I want to thank particularly the Basque government and the Lehendakari for enabling this discussion and for also supporting the report which the EPC has drawn up. I want to thank also the EPC team for the input in that report, in particular Alison, who was leading on this. And I want to thank all the other speakers from whom we heard today, including also the presidents and other representatives of the regions with legislative powers. And last but not least, I want to thank the audience for taking part in this discussion and being interested in this topic. And I'm looking forward to continuing this discussion in future. Thank you very much.